Here we are again then. Okay. So, all right. Okay. So I want to talk about Buddha nature, what that means. Okay. So, as I said before, what Buddha has found from his own direct experience, that minds have the potential to remove the delusions from them. This is something quite unique to Buddhist psychology, quite kind of outrageous, quite amazing, and it's so clearly presented that the delusions in the mind are there, and they've been there since beginningless time. If they're there, they don't have a first cause, but they're not at the core of our being. That's what he's found. That's what he's found. So the Hindus discovered this too, and they went as far as they could go, and they sort of got to the final stages of what they consider as liberation. But from the Buddhist point of view, there was still aspects of ego grasping were still there. That still saw things in a dualistic way that wasn't the end result. And that's where he diverged in his own direction into, that's why Buddhism now. So Buddha nature just means that, the way they say it, we don't talk like that, is simply that the potential of every mind, by definition, every mind is a potential Buddha. It's basically saying that every mind possesses the potential to become Buddha. And of course what Buddha is when you've removed all the delusions and grown all the goodness. That's it. It's a psychological state, not some mystical thing. So we have to we've got to kind of prove that. We need to prove that. Like all of these teachings, we have to prove them to be true. We can start with intellectual, start with theoretical, that's okay. Because Buddha's talking about reality. He's not talking about a belief thing. But, talking about reality. We have to discover reality. And why we suffer is because we're not in touch with reality. So getting in touch with reality is the method for stopping suffering. It's the method for stopping suffering. And therefore, achieving our potential. So how is it? So the real one is, and how is it that negative states of mind, misconceptions, how can they be removed? What's the logic to prove that? It really doesn't take that much to prove. So the key is to try and understand what Buddha means by reality. That things exist. Things exist a certain way. The universe exists in a certain way. Everything exists in a certain way. So the ultimate way that things exist, according to the Buddha, is that they all exist as dependent arisings, which implies that they lack an intrinsic nature. That's reality for the Buddha. That's how things are. He didn't make it this way. You don't make it this way. You observe it, and then you change your mind to get to see that it is that way. And that's when liberation comes. So then what liberation is that you've removed the delusions from your mind. So this is quite hard for us because, like I said, in our neuroscientific models, in our psychological models in the world, we take it as a given that a normal person has some anger, some love, some depression, some kindness, some goodness, maybe hopefully more the good than the bad, but we all recognize them. But the crucial thing is we give them all equal status as being valid parts of an ordinary person. That's just a complete, we don't even speak it this way, but it's totally implied. So to hear Buddha's view that the delusions, that anger and attachment, for example, which we recognize, that pride and low self-esteem and depression, that they're not, this is the key point, they're not at the core of our being. Don't hear it as a belief. This is literal. They're not intrinsic to us. So then if that's the case, first of all, just even hearing that that's a possibility should be very encouraging to us. If you really believe that those weeds in the garden cannot be removed, then you're allowed to be depressed. You've got to learn to live with them. But we know the weeds can be removed, so you've got to find the method. So that's the point. No wonder we are depressed when we look at our minds. We can be forgiven for being depressed and overwhelmed. Look at the delusions in the world. Look at the mess in the people's minds. Look at the anger. Look at the low self-esteem. Look at the depression, the anger, the misery, the unhappiness. Look at it. So, of course, if you think it's a natural part of who you are, don't be surprised you're depressed. But the Buddha's telling us, no, honey, it's not. Just even hearing this should be encouraging for us. So let's look at the logic of why these are not at the core of our being, and therefore why we all possess Buddha nature. That's the meaning. Why? What's the logic? Well, the first thing we have to understand, and we learn all this in high school, is we have to understand the way the mind works. that we have to understand how we've got negative and neurotic, deluded, ridiculous, fear-based states of mind and valid, reasonable, other-based, sensible, productive, beneficial states of mind. That's the key way Buddha divides them. So we've got to obviously recognize the difference. We've got to learn to develop discrimination. That's the actual job of being a Buddhist. From day to day, that's the actual job of being a Buddhist. Learning through getting concentration, learning the Buddhist model of the mind, understanding what a deluded state of mind is and what a positive one is, and learning to distinguish between them. Because right now, they're like in a big soup of emotion. They all come together and we can't tell one bit from another. And we give them equal status. This is me, you know. And then we know, when we're miserable, we know that the negative ones loom large. Not even trying to be depressed about it. We're all like that. You know, I've never met a person yet who says, I can't stop thinking good thoughts. I've met nobody who says that. You think about what I'm saying. Oh, I can't stop thinking thoughts about compassion. I can't stop thinking about love. And I can't stop thinking about sentient beings. No. We can't stop thinking about how miserable I am, no one loves me, depressed, angry, fat, too thin, too this, too that. We're always dissatisfied. And that's the energy of attachment. So, we have to recognize these emotions. They've got these deluded thoughts. They've got two main characteristics. They are disturbing. This should be fairly easy to prove. We know we're miserable if you can't stop being depressed. You know you're miserable if you can't stop being angry. We kind of know it. It's obvious. It goes without saying. So the first characteristic we have to recognize is they're disturbing. To whom? Well, to you, apart from anybody else. That should be enough for us to think, how can I get rid of this anger? It's so disturbing. No, we think, how can I punch the boyfriend because he's causing my anger? We look in the wrong direction. So we've first got to see they're disturbing. That's pretty evident. But the crucial piece is this. The other characteristic of these unhappy states of mind, these emotions we have, is that they are all rooted in being misconceptions. This is really hard to hear. To hear that anger is a misconception sounds like a joke, doesn't it? There's a person shouting and yelling and screaming and spit coming out their mouth and they're shaking and saying irrational words, and you say that anger is a misconception. What are you talking about? Anger is a huge, violent emotion. Look at it. Well, that's just the body. The body's not angry. But because of the intimate relationship, using this Vajrayana model of the subtle physical energies and the wind energies coursing through these 72,000 subtle channels, and all the wind energies are connected to anger, I've gone berserk. Of course they have. It was like a storm inside. But that's the body. Anger is the mind. So when you begin to understand that all these unhappy emotions, especially the strong ones that we can see that where the body's involved, they're rooted in, they're underpinned by being a misconception. We have to understand that. So how is that true? Let's analyze it. You know, if I'm mad at my boyfriend, I'm angry that Justin said something mean to me. How dare you do that to me, I'll say. Who do you think you are? So we've got to do this analysis of these. This is high school. The analysis of all the states of mind taking over. So we look at the three root delusions. I can see exactly how they're all pinned. So first of all, there's anger. What is anger? Anger is the response when my attachment doesn't get what it wants. And what does my attachment want? It wants Justin to say only nice words to me. That goes without saying. Attachment is a junky in us that only wants the nice things. And it's a default assumption deep in our bones. We're going through life with this assumption, not just that I want good things, but that I deserve only the good things. I just assume that it's Justin's job to only do good things to me so that I can be happy. That's the view of attachment. It's this incredible hubris. It's an incredible sense of entitlement. So it's an elaborate conceptual story that we've completely practiced to the point of perfection, that it's now virtually instinctive. So we've got to get into the mind more deep and unpack these assumptions. So attachment is this outrageous assumption that I only deserve good things, which means Justin has to be kind to me every second. Now, what happens when he says a mean word? Then, of course, my attachment is really offended, and then aversion will arise. How dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. This is the view of attachment and aversion, and we all live between these two 1,000 times a day. No wonder we're insane. And they're both driven by the original assumption of an I in the first place. That's the cosmic joke. So what we're talking about here, I'm using a way of unpacking the concepts that attachment is, that anger is, that ego grasping is. They're elaborate concepts. So you've got to unpack beyond just the feeling, which is the body. That's so gross, it's not nearly enough. We have to unpack the feeling and put words on it. So what is attachment saying? Attachment is saying, I deserve only the good things, desperate only to get the nice things. It can only, that's what attachment's saying. So that is a conceptual story. Well, Buddha's saying it's a misconception. It is not a valid assumption. It is rooted in the delusion that believes in an intrinsic separate me in the first place. That's why when you realize emptiness, you cut all of them and they collapse into a heap of nothingness. There's no longer that assumption of an I, so there's no longer attachment to get what the I wants, and there will be no longer anger when the I doesn't get what it wants. It's obvious they all collapse. They're all misconceptions. They are misconceptions. They are thoughts, but they're rooted in thoughts, but then we add emotion to them because they're so habitual. We all know that if you know something so well, it becomes instinctive, and then it becomes an emotional component as well, So we've got to go from the emotional component, deeper into the mind, to get to hear what is the thought, what is attachment actually saying, what is anger saying, what is ego grasp is saying. They're all they're concepts. So, like any concept, if it is not in sync with reality, it's obvious that you can remove it. So I'll use a simple example. I'll just say, where's my cup gone? I need a cup of tea anyway. Where's my cup? There it is. Let's just say I'm learning English and I say, that's pink. Robina, don't be silly, Justin says, it's black. And I know it, but I forgot. So there's no drama. I'm not attached to this view. I just said the wrong thing. So that is pink. Think about it. Is a concept, isn't it? And it's in my mind. So that is black. Is also a concept in my mind. It happens to be there is a valid object out here called black. That's being a valid concept is a thought that's in sync with something that it is that has an object. All thoughts have an object. So there's a thought in my mind that says it is pink. Now that's a misconception because we all agree in our culture that color is called black. That's an agreement. It's a conventional agreement. We've all shaken hands. We've agreed the definition of that one is black. We've agreed upon it. It's a convention. And then I say, oh, it's pink. And Justin points out my mistake. And I'm not hanging on to it. I just forgot. I say, oh, Justin, you're right. It's not. Of course it's not pink. It's black. So the point is this. So simple. This is pink is in my mind as a thought, isn't it? Well, this is black is also a thought. There is a black there, but there is a thought in my mind that's agreeing that that's called black. So there is a thought. That's a valid conception. A valid thought is a thought that's in sync with reality. So the conventional reality here is that's black. That's simple. But pink is also a thought. But it's a misconception. That is not pink. So that is a misconception. So one is a valid conception and one is a misconception. So Justin points out my mistake and I agree with him. So I say, you're right, Justin, it is black. So now the simple point is this. Pink, this is pink, was in my mind. Now he's pointed out my mistake. I now agree with him. Yes, you're right, it is black. So the question is, what happened to the thought that was in my mind a moment ago? And that thought was, it is pink. Well, I'll tell you what happened to it. It's disappeared into a puff of smoke. It has got nothing of it left. It's gone completely. And why can it go from my mind? Because it's not true. And what made it go from my mind is my recognition of the truth. If I have a doubt, I would argue with him, then the thought will stay in my mind. But once I'm clear and I agree that it is black, then this is pink has gone from my mind completely. And what made it go is my recognition of truth. That's how you remove delusions from your mind. So when you unpack attachment and realize it has no basis in reality, that's Buddha's entire point about all the delusions, that they all are exaggerated, distorted embellishments. There is so if I'm attached to this black cup, there is a black cup, But what attachment is doing is, as Lama Zopa says, all the delusions, all the misconceptions, they decorate on top of what is there, a black cup. That is a valid cognition, a black cup, and I do see that and I recognize it, but I'm adding a component onto it that it does not possess, and that is added by the thought of attachment. And attachment's job is to exaggerate the deliciousness of this black cup. So delusions decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that just aren't there. So attachment has no basis in reality. Aversion has no basis in reality. Ego grasping that posits an intrinsic, concrete me has no basis in reality. And all the unhappy emotions and all the misconceptions that Buddha would point out that aren't in sync with reality, they are not have any basis in reality. And that is why they can be removed from the mind. And when you've removed them from your mind by seeing reality, and you've perfected all the virtues, then you're a Buddha. This is logic, not belief. So our job is, this is why we've got to learn about the mind. You've got to study the mind. You can say anger till the cows come home, but if you don't have the proper definition of what anger is and how it's rooted in being a misconception, you won't understand it and you'll never know how you can get rid of it. If you think it's part of your brain, you're lost. There is a part of your brain that is triggered when anger is there. So for me, the brain is a physical indicator of what's happening in the mind, but it's not the mind itself. This is the Buddhist point. Are we communicating here? I hope so. So we've got to work on our minds, folks. That's the job of being a Buddhist. We can't just, I'm going to control my anger today. I have this feeling, I'll control it. That's not nearly enough. You've got to go way more subtle into your mind. You've got to study the Buddhist model of the mind. You've got to study the logic of it, and this is very old, coming from these Indians first. It's been around for several thousand years. Study it in detail and then use that as your map, and then you see your own mind and you recognize, oh, that's anger, that's jealousy, that's attachment, that's love. So why are virtuous states of mind valid cognitions? A valid cognition is it's got some basis in reality. An invalid cognition is one that hasn't. So Buddha would also say, before we get to the valid ones, Buddha would also say that not just about the emotions, they're the ones we've got to start to look at, but also about the views, the view of karma, for example. He would say that is a valid cognition. He would say it is true that cause and effect is the way the world is. He's not being rude. He's not being fundamentalist. He's not demanding you believe him. He's allowed to say what is true. A scientist can tell you what is true. Anybody can tell you what is true. Jesus can tell you there is a creator. That's up to him. He's allowed to. It's up to whether you think it's true or not. You've got to find out. So the Buddha would say there's no such thing as a creator. That's a misconception. He's not being rude. He's allowed to say that and give his findings. It's up to you to follow that. He says, no, your mind is not the brain. He would disagree with the materialist. He's not disagreeing there's a brain, but he's disagreeing that that's the mind. He absolutely disagrees you get your mind from your parents. That's wacky for him. He says the mind is beginningless. That's what he says is true. Where from? Because it's observation. It's not revelation. You didn't hear it from somebody else up in the sky. He says karma is the natural law that runs the universe. Not punishment and reward, not Buddha, not creators and things. So he says they're all misconceptions. He would argue with this, and that's what you study when you study Buddhism properly. It's up to you. You might prove Buddha's wrong. That's okay. Then you reject him. Why do you want to find out what's true? Because when you find out what's true, you're liberated, baby. So finding out what's real is the method to getting happy. And this is the point Buddha's making, we're unhappy because we believe in things that aren't true. It's fairly easy to see how you'd be unhappy if you believe in things that aren't true. You'll be bumping up against reality all the time. If you believe your $5 note is 50, if you really see 50 when you see 5, every time you go to spend it, and this is a good analogy for delusions, every time you go to spend it, you'll be disappointed because it's not true that it's 50. It's not true that it's 50, and you'll be disappointed. So that's what delusions are. They're liars in our mind that have been pervading our minds for eons, that are totally spontaneous, that we believe are true, and we keep bumping into reality because they're not true. No wonder we're crazy. No wonder we're full of fear. Delusions are rooted in fear. When you realize emptiness, when you've cut the root of the delusions, you have no longer any fear. This is insane to even possibly consider, you know. Fear is the nature of all the delusions. That's why we live in fear. We mightn't use the word fear, but we call it about anxiety, panic, worry. They're just variations of the word fear. Because as long as you have attachment, as long as you have anger and all the others, you're living in fear because you're not in touch with reality. We're all insane, Buddha says. He doesn't use that word, but it's a great word. To the extent to which you have any attachment, any anger, any depression, any anxiety, is the extent to which you are suffering, baby. This is his view. So we've got to unpack this mind of ours. Start seeing how the delusions are liars. This is the powerful job of being a Buddhist. And it's not just a bit wishy-washy. It's a super clear, precise job to do, you know. Right. Were there any questions I forget? No.
We do have a couple of questions. We have Mira first.
Who?
Mira.
Mira, good sweetheart. Talk to me.
So you had mentioned, this was back to the teacher relationship, that you had asked Lama Yeshe to be your guru, and you had, of course, he's passed. And so I was just curious, you said he's still your guru, but he's still your guru because you had established that while he was still alive? Or it's not like someone could have like this menu of, oh, I would like someone to be my teacher. You would just, you know, maybe read their teachings. You know, you wouldn't request.
I understand, Mira. This is getting back to now what I did say I would talk about, so it's a very helpful point now to go back to this topic. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is where the real practice, when you start to develop a relationship with a teacher, and when you start to do your practices like you visualize Tara, you might do a Chen raising practice if you got these empowerments, then your practice is, whenever I do Tara, you know, Lama Yeshe, I say present tense. He's dead, you know, but I say present tense because this is the point now. The real practice of developing your relationship with your teacher isn't done necessarily with the physical teacher in front of you. And that's not, I mean, all the years I've known Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe, okay, all the years I knew Lama Yeshe before he passed away, which is about 10 years, maybe 8 years I knew Lama Yeshe. I didn't have much contact. I could count on one hand the meetings I had personally with him. So the real practice of developing this relationship and feeling close to the teacher and opening the heart and developing devotion, which is like, for me, it's like it gives juice to the job. It's like this energy that makes you practice more. It's got a real function, you know. Because you want to please the teacher. I think everybody who's got even a school teacher, a mentor at home, a mentor at work, a person that you rely upon, your music teacher, you've got your teacher, you have your class with your teacher, but when you go home, you are practicing and you literally internalize your teacher's voice. Are you seeing what I'm trying to say, Mira? You're thinking about your teacher, what the teacher said. She said, I must do this, and I'm doing it. And then when I'm doing it and I'm thinking of her being happy with me, this is a valid thing. It's important. We're all human beings. We've got a heart. We need to be loved. So much of your work is your own daily practice, doing your piano, working away, visualizing your teacher, wanting to make them happy. So when you go back to your next class, then they show they're happy and you feel, so it's got a real function to give juice to your practice, that because we've got a human heart. That's the way I like to put it. It's not just intellectual, it's a more of a human thing. The heart is involved. Are you with me here? Including playing piano, not just religion. Can you get my point? So the real function is me and my daily practice. When I did my deity practice, I'd see Tara, I'd do this and do that. Or when I was working, because they were also my bosses. I worked for them as well as they were my teachers. So I wanted to please them. We're human beings. Recognize this. And it's good to use this, especially for a person you feel is valid. So I was happy to be working for Lama Yeshe. I was happy to please Lama Yeshe. So when Lama Yeshe would tell me off, I wouldn't mind because I knew he wanted the best from me. You know, when he changed my job, I'd feel devastated, but I knew he always wanted the best. So I trusted him because from my experience I trusted. So this relationship is in your mind all the time. You're thinking about him. I wanted to please him, but I mean it's just and it's a real method for you. As I keep saying, we've got a human heart, and this is the way to nourish our heart. So in other words, I wanted to be like him. I wanted to become like Lama Yeshe. He was my example. So when I did my Tara practice, I thought of him as Tara. When I did my Chen raising practice, I thought of him as Chen raising. Now when he's dead, it's exactly the same. For me, it's present tense. I'm still using the idea of Lama Yeshe to open my heart, so I'm using him as my mentor, as my example that I want to become like. So that's the practice of quote-unquote guru devotion. It's very human. We're like this. We need people to think about. We need people to love. We need people to look to. We need people to look up to. We need the person to become like. We're human, and it's a very powerful method to help us do that. Are you with me?
Yes, thank you.
So many people feel Lama Yeshe's their teacher and they've never met him. That's because they use it in their practice. This is what's marvelous. And if we think about what I'm saying, it's very natural. We are all like this. But right now, we want our boyfriend to love us. We try to please our boyfriend, and then he punches us in the nose and cheats on us. So we're always disappointed. And that's why we hold our heart back, because we don't trust people. So we've got to find somebody worthy to trust. It's a simple way I have of putting it. It seems to me it's a very skillful method to open the human heart. And when you've got an open heart, even learning math, you will learn it more quickly because you'll want to please that teacher, and eventually you internalize that teacher and you become your own math person. You get my point? And even when you've become like Federer, even you beat Federer, still you have this love for Federer. And you thank him for all his kindness because he helped you become your own Federer. These are the good, simple examples of the function of the guru. But because it's Tibetan and Indian talking and it's so arcane, we can't put it into our own language. Do you understand me, darling?
Yes,
so it's up to us. The work we have to do. It's up to us to do the job internally. That's how we grow. It's a method. It gives juice to our practice. That's the way I like to put it. You with me?
Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good, darling. Thank you so much. Thanks. Very helpful. What else?
We have Stephanie next and then Lynn.
Yes, Stephanie. Talk to me, darling.
So I'm not quite sure how to phrase the question, so I apologize in advance. We have the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. And we live in samsara. And if I look at what's happening with the climate or with social media or politics, I just want to go run off to a cave.
Exactly.
But I'm a householder, so the question is, how do I root myself in helpfulness to other people, but without getting caught up in this, in these real delusions, but that, unfettered advertising, unfettered capitalism, unfettered whatever-ism.
I understand, Stephanie. Honey, this is why we have to look at the teachings in this orderly way. So when we look at the first level of teachings, which is the very beginning of the wisdom wing, which is junior school, the first scope of the Lam Rim, where it's emphasis that you control your body and speech. That's the essence of the first level of practice is playing safe, harnessing your body, harnessing your speech, living in the vows of morality, practicing every day and doing purification. So the whole energy of that level of practice is very cautious. It's almost like the retreat mode. It's almost like you're not very involved in the world. I mean, we are, but hear my point now. Mentally, you're cautious. You leave the world alone. You don't get caught up in it. You don't believe in all the advertising. You don't have too much television. You don't have too many iPads. You don't have too much food, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Really, it's a very rigorous level of training. And now I think, again, I'm using ordinary analogies. Any tennis player worth their salt, that's exactly the level of practice initially. They completely leave music and sex and drugs and rock and roll alone because they want to focus on their tennis. Nobody criticizes them. They're not being fundamentalists. They're focusing 100% on getting their tennis technique down. So you leave the rest of the world alone. You can't get too distracted. You just don't involve yourself in it. And that's an incredible discipline. It's not putting your head in the ground. It's because you're trying to harness your crazy verbal and physical energy so you can begin to then do the real work of going to the next level when now you get into the mind. And this is also the wisdom wing. This is also the retreat mode. This is also the cautious level. You calm your mind down. You have less opinions about things. You don't get involved. You don't buy into all this junk. You keep yourself focused. I can't stress this enough. That's the wisdom wing level. That's the first level of practice. You've got to be this way. You can't leap into the world if you're not even, you can't start leaping into tennis players and having 42 tennis players and the best tennis in the planet and you're only in junior school. You'll go mad, you get crushed. You've got to harness your energy, train your body, train your speech, train your mind, do lots of practice, lots of purification. That's literally like the retreat mode. You need to do that because we can't cope with the world. We go crazy. That's the whole point. But by the time you've harnessed your energy a bit, now you can start to actually look around you and you get to the compassion wing and now you've got more courage courage because you're under control, and now you can be involved in the world, and you're now driven by, you've got renunciation, you haven't got so much attachment, you haven't got so much anger, because they are what cause us to get caught up in the world and go crazy. But if you've harnessed your attachment and your anger and your jealousy, and you control your body and speech, you're not in danger anymore. You're able to handle it because you understand it. You see it's all karma. You see their minds. You know why it's like this, and you're steady and stable. Most of us don't even get to that level. You get my point? Now you get to the compassion wing, and now your compassion begins to become so strong, you're able to be among the chaos, and you're not going to lose the plot because you've controlled your body, speech, and mind, and you understand why it is. You've got the view of karma. Mostly we suffer terribly because we don't have any view. We don't know why things are. We're not so sure about karma. Why is this happening? Why is this suffering? Why is this? Why is that? We all go crazy. But the wisdom wing is the practice of recognizing all those things and steeping yourself in those views so you become confident that you've got an understanding of why it is, and so you leave it there. Now the compassion wing, you can start getting involved now because your compassion begins to grow, and you're able to handle these things, and you begin to have more compassion than fears and worries. It's a very logical progress, but we've got to understand this is the psychological approach to each of the stages of practice. You with me?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And the more you understand, you get renunciation, the more you understand bodhicitta, the more you understand emptiness, the more easygoing you can be, the more relaxed you can be in the chaos. It will not disturb you. And I mean that literally. But we have to have those views. This is the internal work, not as theoretical views, but actually begin to internalize these. And that's what gives us courage and stability in the face of insanity. You with me? It's hard work, honey, but that's the job. And that's why we've got to know where we're at. If you can't handle angry people, keep out of their way, please. But when you get to the bodhisattva path, you understand them so well they will not disturb you now. That's why it's literally levels of practice, not just words in a book. I know you know, I'm just saying it. You with me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Good, Dominic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any more questions, people?
Yeah, we had questions from Lynn.
Good, Lynn. Go, darling.
I have two questions, and they don't quite follow on to what you were just saying. Okay, darling,
no problem. Go.
Okay, so before the break, you were talking about how the yogis and yoginis they're trying to get to a very subtle level
of mind.
Their mind.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think they're doing at the subtle level of their mind? Why are they going there?
The reason you want to get to the subtlest level of your mind is because that level of mind is like the microscope of your mind, where there's no gross level of conceptuality, there's no gross sensory, there's no delusions. So that's a super sharp, clear, subtle level of mind that can easily realize emptiness and get enlightened.
Okay.
It's practical.
So that's the job at that level.
That's the job. That's all you're trying to concentrate. In the sutra practice, it's the same principle, but that's found in Tantra, it's even more subtle. That's why, as Lama Zopa says in his book about death, death is what the yogis have been waiting for. So as Lama Rinpoche says in that chapter, all the sadhanas, the tantric sadhanas, are constructed in such a way that you go through the death process, in that dissolution process where we did from Tara coming into us. When we do it properly, we transform those. First of all the stages of death, which you're training in your meditation every single day. And now when you get to the time when death is coming, you're able to go through it seamlessly, go to from the gross, throw off the grosser level, get to the more subtle, and be conscious all the way to the clear light mind, the greatest yogis of all. And because that's the subtlest level. So even shamatha in the sutra practices doesn't get the mind to the subtlest level. It's the tantric methods that are so powerful that enable the mind to get even more subtle. So that's why the yogis can use the time of death. They get to the clear light effortlessly. They've stayed conscious from the grossest to the subtle to the very subtle, and they're able to the greatest ones can actually remove all the obstacles in the mind, all the obstacles to omniscience, and become a Buddha. You with me? It's this microscope of your mind. All the practices are leading us to that, Lynn. That's the point. All the practices are leading us to get to the subtlest level of mind so we can use it to cut all the delusions and become a Buddha. That's the point.
Thank you.
That's the entire point of all of it. That's it. It's practical. It's technical and practical. So, let's just talk about, though. It's interesting. I mean, I just find it so fascinating talking about these great yogis living in the mountains. And I mentioned, I think, before, Geshe Lama Konchog, 20 years ago, after he passed away, I started doing his biography, working with his attendant, Geshe Tenzin Zopa. And then for some reason, 10 years later, he told me to stop doing it. I don't know why, but now I'm back on it 20 years later. So it's just incredibly inspiring, but mystical initially to us. So he left Tibet. First of all, he was recognized as a little boy. He seemed to be quite special. He must have been, he said he remembered himself. He was a reincarnation of a great yogi. So then also Tenzin Zopa had been his attendant in the past life. So he met him when he was a very little boy. And then anyway, he spent time with him in Kopan. So basically, okay, so I'm jumping around. So he left Tibet in 59, like all the lamas did, the monks and lamas and people. So he went, based on his own lama's instructions, he went up to Tsum, this place where the Milarepa meditated back 1,000 years ago, on the border of Tibet, a bunch of caves up there. And it's, utterly isolated. It's like, 10,000 feet, 14,000 feet up, 6 foot of snow in the winter, and these holes in the wall, basically, these rock holes in the wall. So basically, he had been practicing all his life since the time he was in the monastery. He learned all the texts, he did all the initiation, did all the empowerments, he memorized all the texts, did all the philosophy, he did everything. He was ready, and he left when he was like 30, 29, 30. He left and he had a dream or something like from Milarepa where to go. So he eventually, soon after escaping to Nepal, he then went straight up to this place and he just disappeared off the planet, disappeared off the earth. Basically, so then one day there's this lovely story, about how this local monk, this monastery up there, this local monk had retired to his little kind of house, his retreat house, and he eventually met this yogi, and he walked in and he saw this naked person sitting there with long hair, looking really rough, and couldn't believe. They thought he was a yeti initially. They thought he was a yeti because you hear about meditators, but no one ever meets one who's naked, sitting there in samadhi for days on end. So there's this weird-looking dude, this very rough-looking, very big, naked in a cave with a little bit of red. He knew he was a monk because he had red around his secret parts. A bit of his robes were left. That was all, around his secret parts. So sweet, It's an amazing story. And how he was sitting there in full lotus in deep meditation. He tried to, for day on end, he kept coming back to try and meet him, and he wouldn't come out of samadhi. And one day he came and he offered him a gift, and he said he wanted to have him as his teacher because he started to realize it was a real person. It wasn't just a maniac. It wasn't a madman. You would think as a madman, if you see a naked person walking down the street in San Francisco, you'd lock him up. We know that. But there's yogis. He looked like a madman. His hair was all over the place, wild. There's some whiskers going here, no clothes on, in samadhi. Please, excuse me, what's real, So anyway, he eventually connected with him, and then he met the local people. And he still lived in his cave all the time. So what was the most moving chapter? So you hear about these things, how he's meditating. You're trying to conceptualize what's he doing up there, naked. What the hell is he doing? What an idiot. Why hasn't he got a house? We can't imagine what he's trying to do. And the thing is, though, the one chapter when Tenzin Zopa was about 12, the book is in his voice. I'm writing it, but it's in his voice. So there's one chapter when he's about 12, because Geshe-la, when Lama Yeshe passed away, because he knew Lama, he came to Kopan and he lived the last 20 years of his life at Kopan. And as Lama Zopa said, when Lama Yeshe passed away, all the smiles at Kopan went away. But when Geshe-Lama Kontrog came, all the smiles came back, because they just adored him. But the aspect he showed was this grumpy grandfather. He was sort of very, very wrinkled. Well, he'd spent years in the caves naked in 6 foot of snow. You can imagine how wrinkled his body would be. He's totally weather-beaten. And all these monks, when they first met him at Kopan, they thought he was this funny old country bumpkin. They had no idea. And he acted very humble and rather silly, You couldn't ever tell he was a yogi. Not possible. You can't tell. So anyway, he spent all his life at Kopan, very unassuming, but very wrathful. He scared the life out of me. He scared the life out of me, I tell you. Anyway, the most moving chapter is Tenzin Zopa went with him in 1988. He moved to Kopan in about 1984, and then he took Tenzin Zopa was about 12, and he took him up to on a pilgrimage to all these places where he'd meditated for these 7 or 8 years. And because it's told in Tenzin Zopa's voice, as his child and as his ordinary person, it's very powerful because there he is, this old man. He's about 60-something at the time. And at Kopan, Tenzin Zopa said he always acted very like an old father. He walked slowly, he bent over, he would help him sit down, he'd help him stand up. But when he was up in the mountains, he suddenly transformed into this like a young boy. He would leap into the rocks, he was in complete bliss, he was beaming the whole time. And he's described all these different caves that he's lived his life in. And then from Tenzin Zopa's voice, more than 5 minutes in one of these holes in the wall, the wind is so freezing. And this is in the summer. summer, freezing cold, with nothing in this ugly rocks. He didn't even want to touch the rocks, they were so gross. And there's Geshe-la completely blissing out. So you're thinking, what the hell is this man seeing? Why is he blissing out? And this is where it's hard to see. That he lived, as Lama Zopa said, he lived in Vajrayogini's Pure Land. So this is too cosmic for us. But what this means is, you see, these Buddhas, there's two, as I said, there's two forms in which the Buddha manifests to benefit sentient beings. One is the body that looks like you and me. So I think use Dalai Lama as a good example. All the Lamas say he actually is the Buddha. Now, I don't know. I'm happy to see him as the Buddha, but I can't tell you with certainty. But they say he is. So then he's got a body, and he's taken on a body. As you can see, we all have an environment. We all live in environments, don't we? And that's where we understand karma, all the different realms of existence. Everybody has a certain kind of body. The spirits have a body of air, and they've got a weird environment. They can go through things, and they're strange because they've got a subtle level of physical energy, their air energy, but their mind is completely deluded. Animals have a body, and they've got a certain environment, and we share it with some of them. Then you've got the humans. We've got a body, a gross body, and we live in an environment that's suitable to this gross body. We don't live in an environment made of light. It's made of the concrete elements like our body has. You bump into a wall, you'll get a headache. So we live in an environment that suits our mind and suits our body. So the Buddhas come along out of their kindness, and they will manifest in a body to look like you and me. So technically the Dalai Lama looks like a human. He acts like a human, but he's technically not a human. A human is the result of delusions. Less delusions than an animal, but it's a karmic result of delusions. But he hasn't got delusions if he's a Buddha. So he's pretending to be a human being. He manifests in a human body. He got born in a human mummy's womb, but he's pretending to be a human. It's the only way to think about it. And it's quite literally true. So he acts like, of course, he's not going to tell you he's a Buddha. We all know he says he's a regular person, because we'd be shocked if he said he's a Buddha. Then he says he's got to prove it. So he's playing safe. It's very sensible. But he's acting like us, living in an environment like us. He goes to the toilet. He has glasses. He looks like us, acting like us in an environment that we share. Now, the Sambhogakaya, the subtler body that the great yogis can see in their meditation because they've accessed their subtle mind, they manifest in a subtle light body, but they're also going to they don't float in the sky. They're going to live also in an environment. Well, that's what when you see those round pictures called a mandala, that's an architectural drawing of the abode of each of these Buddhas. They've each got their own environment. Now, this gets us to what Christianity talks about. This is where we think it's science fiction, unless you've been a Christian. There are subtler levels of reality, Buddha says, and it's all created by our minds. We create all of them. So a God realm, which is in samsara for the Buddha, which is like the top suburb in samsara, it's the fruit of lots of virtue. The mind is totally blissful, because bliss, happiness, each moment of happiness we have is the fruit of a seed planted when we did a virtuous action. So we have accumulated bucket loads of virtuous actions from being kind and loving and non-killing and living in vows. And so right now in our life, it is manifesting in every second we have any pleasure at all. Every time we can get food, that's the fruit of generosity. Every time someone's kind to us, that's the fruit of being kind. Every time anything good happens, it's the fruit of millions of our virtuous karmic seeds. They literally manifest as an environment and as people and as us. We create all of that. It's our own karmic appearance. It's not given to us by God. It's not existing out there from its own side. Not possible. So every being has a certain kind of environment. Well, the Buddhas, in the God realm, for example, in samsara, which is the fruit of lots of virtue, you've got subtle light body, and you have a suitable environment. It's just like the way they talk about paradise or heaven. It's exactly the same experience, but the Christians and the Muslims interpret it differently, and the Buddhists interpret it as the fruit of your own actions. So then we can have different levels of reality. A spirit has also got a disembodied body, but it's intensely suffering. It's air energy, and their minds are demented. You've even got hell beings. Their minds are conjoined with a fire element. You could argue that. And they're all created by those sentient beings. The most blissful ones to the most suffering. We are all experiencing our own karmic appearance. So the Buddhas who manifest in these subtle light bodies also have an abode where they exist. So every one of those mandalas, it's an architectural drawing of their abode. But you don't see it if you've got a gross mind. So this is what Tantra talks about. We are very mundane. We see everything as very mundane, which is why we have to lift our goal. So there's Geshe Lama Kontrog, a regular human, but he got single point of concentration. He then began to practice Vajrayogini. So in his meditation every single day, getting his mind ever more subtle, ever more subtle. So he starts to see the Buddha literally. So when he's in those places where the caves are, all the Buddhas, all the Lamas say, where the meditators have been, is where all the Buddhas come. So he's literally seeing the reality of Vajrayogini in her Pure Land and all the Buddhas there, all the Buddhas and all the Bodhisattvas. He's seeing them all around. I mean, this, of course, is like science fiction to us. We don't believe it's true. He's living in this blissful environment. He sees the rocks, but because he's got complete control over his own elements, when you've got tumo, you can try, you can generate heat in your body, which is why he could live in those rocks. And even when he got chucked out of his first cave by the poor superstitious local villagers, they chucked rocks at him. And because meditators only want to be on their own to get as many realizations as possible, talk about retreat mode, that he ran off with his little one packet of a few texts, all he possessed. And he couldn't get a cave, but he found some juniper trees. So he lived under juniper trees for 6 months with 6 foot of snow in winter in bliss. So there's Tenzin Zopa reporting this, and it's so moving because it's an ordinary view and you can't conceive of what he's experiencing because you can't see his mind, and he's in bliss all the time, in touch with the Buddhas. It's not as if he's not seeing reality. He's seeing another level of reality as well. And because he has complete control over all his energy, he's able to be warm and blissful, doesn't need food, didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't sleep, didn't need clothing, didn't need anything. It's hard for us to conceptualize that. And you think, what the hell do you want to be like that for, Because he wants to become a Buddha. Quickest way to become a Buddha.
Wonderful.
Is that helpful? Interesting.
Oh, great.
But I mean, it's sort of like, it doesn't feel like it's, who wants that, So as Tenzin Zopa said, he's just 12 years old at the time. He did his best to try and be like his guru, but he couldn't cope at all. It was just so gross. He didn't want to touch the rocks. They looked revolting. He couldn't imagine it because Geshe Lama's mind, you see, this is where when a person is totally given up attachment and aversion and delusions and ego grasping, there's no need for anything. We can't imagine this. It sounds like mental illness to us. We just think a normal life is where you have to have food and housing and clothing and heating and cooling and this and that. And we do. That's why we're all junkies, basically. But it's because it's so normal, we find it hard to see that we're junkies. We just think it's normal. But he doesn't need any of this to get blissful. Because the point of the mind this is the point. I think I didn't talk to you people about this. This is so important. How are we going for time?
We have 25 minutes left.
What? How many? 40.
25.
Good, okay. So, let's look at this. Let's go back to high school now, okay? When we learn about the mind, you learn that we've got the negative states of mind, the positive, and then the third category, I like to call them the mechanics of the mind, because they're the parts of our mind that make us function. Whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need concentration, you need recognition, you need vigilance, you need good memory, all these parts of our mind, like the technical parts. We all need those, whether you're a bad or good person. So in that sense, they will get developed in concentration meditation. So in that category, there's a state of mind called feeling. This is not how we use the word, okay? This is really important to understand. It's not like an emotion. It's not the equivalent of emotion. From the Buddhist perspective, according to this way we have our body, and this is the point that I was getting at talking to Catherine, trying to understand how we can use bliss, use pleasure. We only have pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, or neutral feelings. Well, let's forget the neutral, okay? So basically we're focused on the pleasant and unpleasant. Well, pleasant feeling is a synonym for the word happiness. Now, we think of happiness, we're so addicted to the belief that happiness is coming from the event or the object or the person, that when you talk about your happiness, and even you think about your happiness, you think about the thing, the event, and the person. We conflate the object with the happy feeling, but happiness is not external. And then the second kind of feeling is an unpleasant feeling. That's another word for the word suffering. Well, we again conflate suffering feelings with the object, the husband leaving me, because we're so addicted to the external world. But feeling is the mind. It's the mind. So we have pleasant feelings and we have unpleasant feelings. We have moments of happiness and we have moments of unhappiness. And we can see there's a spectrum from the most intense moments of joy, and I don't think many of us have those, to the mildest moment of just slight pleasant feeling, So, Feeling, pleasant feeling, happiness, joy, rapture, ecstasy, whatever level of happiness you talk about, that is not the same as attachment, but we conflate them 100%. So that's why we get sort of neurotic about pleasure. We assume, when Buddha, as Lama Zopa says, when Buddha says you've got to give up attachment, we say, oh, I've got to give up my happiness, because we think attachment refers to happiness. Because the point is there is a relationship. It's very precise. We need to understand it. This is how we get renunciation. So what happens right now is we all are junkies for happy feelings. We all want happy feelings. That's okay. The universe, everybody wants happy feelings. As Buddha says, basically, everybody wants happiness and nobody wants suffering. Fact. So Buddha's methodology is methods of how to get happy feelings, and to stop unhappy feelings. That's one way of describing the entire Buddhist path from A to Z. So basically, he's telling us that at the moment we've got this bunch of misconceptions about how to get happiness. We're using wrong methods. The methods we use to get happiness, he's saying, not only don't bring us happiness, they even bring us more suffering. So he's not being fundamentalist, he's being technical. But we've got to learn this to understand what he's meaning technically. So what our method right now of getting happy feelings, we all know, the only way we can get happy feelings is to get an object that triggers such that when we have contact with it, then yes, a pleasant feeling is triggered. So the pleasant feeling is fine. There's nothing wrong with the pleasant feeling. As Lama Yeshe would joke, the more pleasure, the better, dear. Pleasure is fine. Happiness, pleasure, joy, love, not love, ecstasy, all these words on a spectrum of the mildest to the most intense happy feelings. Fine. Nothing wrong. But our method, the only method we have, being in this sensory body, having the five senses, being in samsara, is to get an object, a person, an event, a thing, a sound, a smell, such that when we have contact with it, then it triggers in the mind a pleasant feeling. That's our method. And Buddha says, I'm sorry, guys, better than nothing, but this is the trouble. Now, the point is he talks about 3 levels of suffering in the Four Noble Truths. The very first noble truth is there is suffering, and he's got 3 levels. The first one is called the suffering of suffering, and that's when the bad things happen. And that's, in other words, when you meet the object that triggers an unpleasant feeling. The stove is too hot. The cake is the wrong cake. The husband leaves you. So it's the same. So an unpleasant feeling is triggered when we have contact with certain events and things and sounds and smells and tastes or whatever. So then pleasant feelings are triggered in the same way. That's deluded, Buddha says. So what's happening is this. The first kind of suffering is the suffering of suffering, is when the bad things happen, which triggers unpleasant feelings. And we know we don't want these. All we want is the pleasant feelings. So the first kind of suffering is called suffering of suffering. And now that, for the Buddha, is the result of having harmed others in the past, such that in this life the husband leaves me, I get killed or hit on the head or not, or raped or get a headache. Whatever it is, any moment of suffering is the fruit of my past non-virtue. So we know that's the suffering we don't want. That's awful. That's the suffering of suffering. Now the second level of suffering, Buddha calls it the suffering of change, which sounds kind of boring. But what's shocking is what he's referring to is what we call happiness. So we go to the second noble truth where we look at the causes of suffering. There are 2. The grossest kind of suffering, there are 2 causes. Justin punches me in the nose, then that's not the main cause of my suffering, it's a catalyst. The main causes of my suffering in this moment are 1, my action of punching Justin 2.5 lives ago, or whatever, and 2, the delusion of anger that drove me to do it. They're the 2 main causes of this moment of suffering, and that Justin, yes, was a catalyst, but only a catalyst. He's not the main cause at all. My past harming of Justin and driven by the delusion I had, they're the 2 main causes of suffering. So now we look at those delusions in high school. We control the body and speech in junior school, where we abide by the laws of karma and stop killing and stop lying and stop stealing. At least that prevents us from creating the grossest suffering in the future. But then we get to high school, we start to look at the mind, and we start to see that effectively the main cause of suffering in our mind in day-to-day life is attachment. This junkie in us that is constant dissatisfaction, always never satisfied, always wants something more, believes totally that it's the cake or the person or the Justin or the handbag or the thing out there that when I get it, I'll get happy. That's our methodology for getting happy. And Buddha says, sorry guys, it's actually called suffering. Because why? And we can prove it. We know when you put that cake in the mouth, there is definitely a pleasant feeling triggered. He doesn't argue with it. He's not resenting that we have happiness. But look what happens. But we can't bear this. We can't like to look at this. He calls it the suffering of change because he's telling us, and you'll have to prove it yourself pretty quickly, that as you keep eating that cake, it keeps going downhill until eventually the cake becomes so disgusting that if you ate one more piece, you'd vomit. So in other words, it begins as the cake triggers a pleasant feeling, fact, but we're not satisfied with that pleasant feeling, so we've got to put another piece of cake in. We're not satisfied with the pleasure we got, so we've got to get more. And it's going downhill from there. I think the first mouthful is the best one. But we're not satisfied. We're greedy, and that's attachment. It's never satisfied. So it does trigger pleasant feelings, but inexorably, as you analyze that experience of the first mouthful, second piece, third piece, we know it's true that as you watch what's happening, the cake is becoming more disgusting, and eventually you eat another piece and you would vomit. We know that. So what's the vomiting? That's the suffering of suffering. So the suffering of change leads to the suffering of suffering, which is the first kind of being now too stuffed and getting acid reflux and wanting to vomit. We know this, and there's not a single example of happiness in our life, being junkies, being in this samsaric body of the senses, that doesn't turn into the suffering of change. But we just can't, the suffering of suffering, but we can't bear to think about it. It's too painful. In other words, when Buddha says we've got to give up attachment, it seems so cruel. But I mean, what choice, we think, what choice have I got? How the hell am I supposed to get happy feelings if I don't get a cake or get a boyfriend? We have no other methods. That's our tragedy. And you know what he's saying to us? Hey guys, I've found a method to get such happy feelings, you won't believe it. He's saying this, but we just can't see it in the teachings. Because he doesn't say it like this. He's found a method of how to get such bliss, such joy, that we can't even imagine it. And so basically it's this. And that's where even if you just get single point of concentration, you're proving the point. And that's why Lama Yeshe in his wonderful book, Mahamudra, they normally don't do that in the text, but he wants to get us excited. So he tells us all the qualities that we'd have, and maybe tomorrow morning we'll go through them. He tells us the qualities that we'd have, even just getting single point of concentration, even just calming the mind down to a subtler level, beyond conceptuality, beyond senses, beyond the delusions, where you taste the nature of your own mind. And as he said, you have this rapture. Your mind is utterly peaceful, utterly blissful, utterly radiant, naturally. You have crystal clear, as if you could see every phenomenon in the universe. You have effortless control in your daily life over every single tiny thought. We can't even conceive of this in our culture. And this is real. It's not religion. This is our own. So even then we can begin to trace our own true nature, that our mind, when it's unencumbered by delusions, is naturally blissful, naturally joyful. Naturally. But we think of pleasure as the result of getting something. And that's why we're all these junkies. We're maniacs, we're demons, we're demented. And all we do is get some pleasure, but because we've got dissatisfaction, we keep wanting more cake until eventually you want to vomit and we wonder where the problem is. Then you get hungry again, and then you forget all about it next day, and you just think of the cake as the thing that caused pleasure. But the cake also caused you to vomit. Didn't you notice? But we forget that. We forget that because we're junkies. So all Buddha's saying is this: you people, you're on the wrong track. You think happy feelings are what you get when you get the cake. No, folks. Happy feelings are what you get when be more precise. We think our method for getting happy feelings is to get what attachment wants. That's our method. That's it. But he says, no. Happiness, happy feelings are what you get when you give up attachment. So even before you get near concentration, even before you get near practicing bodhicitta, you can see logically, as you get less deluded, slightly less angry, slightly less attached, slightly less jealous, slightly less anxious, that's what happens when you practice, what do you think you become? Slightly more happy. It is logical. It is logical. As you control your body, you control your speech, and you control your mind, which is junior school and high school, you just naturally become more happy. This is logical. It tells us, it proves that happiness is what you get when you give up delusions. Well, you really get happiness when you really give up delusions, and then you can never be anything but utterly blissful and radiant, but also calm and peaceful. So there was Geshe Makonchog, living in bliss, literally. His mind is blissful because he's found his own bliss. He doesn't need objects to get it. So he's not a junkie. He's given up attachment. He's given up being a junkie. This is literal. This is scientific. It's not religion. It's not belief, I promise. It's just a hard job, that's all. Are we communicating here, people? Any questions? Any questions about this? So we have to distinguish what attachment is from feelings and happy feelings. We just conflate them. We're so vague and confused, you know.
I think Maxine had a question.
Good, Maxine. Yes, darling.
One's, I think, going to be quicker than the other. There's
Don't worry.
two.
Good.
You have referred to Federer a couple times.
Yeah.
That's one question, what that is, or who.
Oh, that's that tennis player, Roger Federer.
Oh, that's a tennis player.
Yeah, that's the tennis player. Your tennis player. You're the analogy for your teacher.
The archetype.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Okay, great. And the other one is you started talking about the 3 root delusions.
Yes.
And I heard, can you name them?
I can, yes. These are the 3 we really need to understand, and all the others stem from these 3. So there's a hierarchical relationship between these, you know. And the root one, the most subtle, the most primordial, is called, literally simply called ignorance. Ma rigpa in Tibetan, unawareness. But it's known colloquially when that ignorance is about this. What that ignorance does, it's a very specific ignorance. It believes that everything possesses a concrete, solid, independent, set in stone character. And when we're relating to the I, the phenomenon called I, that ignorance is known colloquially as ego grasping. And this is the root of all samsara. And it's so primordial, it's so subtle. I think in ours, we don't even give it a name we just take it as an utter given that there is a separate self there, and it is, and this ego grasping, it's the root of all the others. So first of all, it's positing a separate, bereft, concrete, set in stone, necessarily miserable, fear-based sense of I. On the basis of that primordial assumption in the mind, it gives rise naturally to the next one, which is this bottomless pit of a junkie, the craving to get what that supposed I wants. And that's attachment. And that's the one that runs the universe. And it's got a whole spectrum. From practicing attachment in the past, because what we've just proven, if we follow attachment, not only do you not get happiness and satisfaction, you increase your craving for the cake, you increase your craving for the object, so it leads to hell, you know, to more misery. And we know that by looking at junkies. So from practicing attachment in a past life, the most primordial level of it in this life, we're born with deep, profound dissatisfaction. Never enough. No matter what I do, not enough. No matter what I get, not enough. No matter what I achieve, not enough. No matter how much Justin tells me he loves me, it's never enough. And we know this is, as Lama Zopa says, this is the main suffering of our modern culture. We are deeply, profoundly, distressingly dissatisfied. We just believe I am not enough. That's the self-loathing we have. Is I am not enough. It's a nightmare. This is the energy of attachment at the most subtle level. The next level of attachment, because I never feel I'm enough or I have enough, naturally it leads to the craving to find something. And where do we look? Out there in the external world. Where else to look? That's all we do. We look in the outside world for the objects of the senses, looking desperately for something such that when I get it, it will fill up the gaping hole and give me satisfaction, whether it's cake or bodies or who knows what. Do you understand? That's the energy of attachment, the proactive energy. And then what it does, this attachment, is grotesquely exaggerate the deliciousness of Justin, the deliciousness of the cake, that makes you even more excited. And the next level is then the manipulating and the controlling to get it, and then the exaggerating of its deliciousness, and then the anticipating of the bliss that's going to come when you get the cake and get the Justin and get whatever it is, and then the bitter, terrible disappointment when you discover it's all a lie. I mean, there is some pleasure there, but it's all these misconceptions are subtly ingrained in this attachment. It's so profound. It's so automatic. So we've got to unpack and unpack and unpack these assumptions, you know. So then when attachment doesn't get what it wants, which is 1,000 times a day, that's the third one. And the bare bones name for that is aversion. Aversion. And so that's got a spectrum as well. The most volatile, obvious level of aversion, when you don't get what attachment wants, is anger. You shout and yell and scream and have a panic attack. But the milder levels are irritation, annoyance, frustration, upset. Everybody has that, but we don't pay attention to that. You don't go to your therapist and say, I got annoyed today. They tell you to shut up. The therapist only wants you to come when you want to kill your husband, because that's our trouble in our culture. We wait till it's too late. We never pay attention. So all of these things build up until one day the straw that breaks the camel's back, and you kill your husband before you know it, because we never paid attention. So these are the 3 root delusions, and all the others, arrogance and this and that, all come on the basis of these. So it's a really clear map of the mind. It's very fascinating. And we've got to understand these 3 initially sound very simple and cute, but they are primordially deep, and we've got to put meat on the bones by looking into our mind daily, and because they're driving everything, you know. And because all this stuff's so automatic for us, and we don't pay attention until it's too late, is our problem. I don't pay attention to my mind until I want to kill you. Then I think I better go to the therapist. But this is too late, you know. We've got to do preventative. We've got to do maintenance. We've got to know our minds well and not wait till the drama to happen. That's why we all go mad in our culture, because we leave it till too late. So we've got to see the mind all the time, and this is the real job. And once we begin to do this, we can become sane, you know. Before you get even single point of concentration, before you realize emptiness, before you get bodhicitta, you can already become a sane, stable, content person. No question. It just takes time. You with me?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Great.
Ego grasping, attachment, and aversion. They're the 3. And all the others are rooted in these, you know. It's very interesting. What else, people?
And then we had one more question from Sydney. Sydney, excuse me.
Sydney, go.
Sydney.
Go talk to me.
There. I was wondering if on the other side of the coin, for finding, I guess you call it equanimity, when you're not ecstatically happy or dreadfully sad. I prefer it these days, but I'm getting old.
I know, I understand, Sydney. I understand, darling. You know, yeah, go on.
That to in your meditations, and when you don't feel good, because we don't feel good a lot. And I think that in our culture, so much emphasis is put on being at the top of that ecstatic moment at all times, that we feel like we've done something wrong or we're missing something.
I understand.
If we don't feel that way.
I do understand.
But to spend time thinking, okay, I feel anxious today. I don't feel very secure, or I feel sad. And to spend time thinking it's okay not to be
No, I understand, Sydney.
every
No, it's a really good point. So all I'm doing here is trying to show the end result that Buddha is telling us we can accomplish, that when we've conquered the delusions, and when I say we can be ecstatic and blissful, it sounds hysterical, but you wouldn't run around being ecstatic and hysterical. You just be normal. Your mind is naturally joyful, but you'd look normal, you'd act normal, you wouldn't be extreme, because it's not coming from attachment. But the point is, what you're describing is the process. Yes, you're absolutely right. Given that we have got these delusions and we have got anxiety, then we can learn to be more wise and more steady with them. You're talking about the process, but I was just mentioning the end result to give us encouragement that this stuff is not set in stone. So yes, that would be the result of really working hard on your body, speech, and mind. The result is you become more stable, less up and down. It sounds boring, like you suggested initially, because you don't talk about being ecstatic. I just use that as an example of the mind when it's completely unencumbered by all delusions. So, I mean, look at the Dalai Lama. You can see he's he's got equanimity, but he's joyful and wonderful and funny and delightful no matter what happens, So that's really a way of putting it, that's really hopeful that we can. And so what you're describing is the process. Yes, I am miserable, I am depressed, I am anxious. That's where we're at now, but we can learn to reinterpret it and not buy into it and become steady and have equanimity and be more stable. You're absolutely right. And that is a type of joy or happy feelings that are much more stable. The other one's too hysterical. Do you understand? But what I'm talking about when you realize is not unstable. It's just, I'm using these words ecstasy consciously because it just sounds so absurd to say your mind could be ecstatic, but it's peaceful. It's right now we have ecstasy, we're out of our brains with berserk because it's attachment based. But when you've got a mind that's blissful, that is not based on attachment, your mind is peaceful and you are totally virtuous. You never lose the plot. So it's not a level of happiness we even comprehend. But that's our potential. We don't feel disappointed because we haven't got it, but we're heading towards it. Do you understand my point, Sydney? It's a really good point.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, darling.
And then we have Wendy and I think Denise.
Good. Please talk to me then.
Wendy?
Yeah, thank you.
Good, darling.
Robina, sometimes things are mixed. They're not as clear cut, right? Like there's so much work in the world that has been created that is actually quite beneficial, but you could say that there were mixed motives in it, right? Like I'm in the theater, right? So many people are driven by an addiction to reputation.
That's right.
Right? But they also, it's not only that.
No, that's right. Exactly. No, you're absolutely right, Wendy. But that's the job we have to do, to see our own mind and to know the differences. That's the moment. At the moment, if you're in, most of us here, because we even want a spiritual path, that's because we've got some access to our virtue. That's our saving grace, Wendy. Absolutely. But what we tend to do in our culture is accept that it's normal to have the reputation, and it's normal to have the neurotic ambition, and it's normal to get attached and depressed. Whereas we're trying to distinguish here that yes, it's normal, but we can learn to change it. So it's learning to identify that we can change them. But that's where we have to see the difference, and then we learn to change our motivation. So if you start to see you getting all excited because people think you're so fancy. That's why you notice that with people who become movie stars, this real conflict of becoming, they know they're famous, they know people adore them, but they all feel like fakes because they know that it's a regular person inside and convinced that one day they'll get caught out. So that's this terrible dilemma we have. But that's, I always think, so we've got to see the difference in our own mind. That's all, and know the difference in those states of mind and navigate it all, and then develop the positive qualities and the positive motivations and don't buy into the rubbish ones. That's the job, and that's why we need to distinguish between them. So of course there's more than just one there. But we have to become conscious and grow the virtue and lessen the rubbish. And that's what sanity comes from, and that's what happiness comes from. Absolutely, you're right, totally. That's our saving grace, This is how come we're not psychotics. If we were the psychotic ones, we would have mainly access to our poor old delusions and have no and not able to access our virtues. That's our saving grace. How fortunate. And that's what we're going to have. Go on.
Are psychotic in the work that I do, but they're working on themselves.
No, well, that's good. As long as we're working on ourselves, Wendy, that's the main thing. That's our saving grace. And that's why we've got to be brave to own the nonsense, but not to be fearful of it and not to be afraid it's going to take over. We've got to be honest and see it and know that we can be in charge of our minds, eventually, and make choices and not be afraid of it. And that's where, too, I remember, someone, Richard Gere, when people know he's a Buddhist, and he asked His Holiness, should he give up being an actor? He said, of course not. Because you can benefit many people just by your role, by who you are in your world. You can have some influence. You can benefit others. So it's marvelous. So don't be scared of success. Don't be scared of being famous because it's due to past karma that you've got the karma to be of benefit to many people. So you use that for good, not to be nervous about it, not to be ashamed of it. We use it for good, Do you understand?
I do. Thank you so much.
Okay. Who's next, Gina?
It was Denise.
Okay, good, Denise. Talk to me.
Venerable, it feels to me that it's this somehow ingrained in our culture. We will be happy if we get what we want, if we get a degree, if we get a this, if we get a that.
That's right.
And then as studying Buddhism, it's taking this logic and saying that is an insatiable want. You will not get to satisfaction because once you realize that it was capable of getting there, you will just want for more. So that urge to achieve, to have, is insatiable.
So then the point is?
So we take then the belief that the theory, something that happiness comes from outside of us, and we start saying within ourselves, I'm becoming happy because I'm not attaching to that item any longer. I'm feeling satisfaction in that I don't need that compliment all the time.
So this
I'm
is
feeling.
Yeah. So you've got. Is there a question from this, or you're just stating it?
I'm asking.
Oh, you're asking. Is that right? You mean?
To see the transition go from exterior to the.
I understand. Yeah. Okay. So put it even more simply. Or don't put it more simply, put it in you're using the Buddhist language, but I'll say it again, that the attachment in us believes, this is the irony of attachment, it believes I'm nothing until I get something. It believes I'm nothing until I achieve something. So if what we're trying to achieve is mainly driven by attachment, then it will be a bottomless pit. But if you're also driven by the wish to benefit others, and you add that to the mix, then when you get your degree, you'll delight in your progress. You'll be so happy that you're growing your own self, and you won't pay much attention to the attachment, and you will get satisfaction from the fact that you're growing yourself, and now you can use this to be a benefit to others, and then it all becomes worthwhile. So whether you're making $100 million, getting 42 degrees, being the most famous film star on the planet, you're able to navigate with that and use it for your own satisfaction, to grow and know that your own nature of who you are is not defined by the fact that you've got it, because you can lose it all and you won't be devastated. That's because you're giving up attachment. But you don't resist it. Also, you can use it to be a benefit to others, and then you become happy and you make it useful to others. Then it's virtuous. Then it's valid. And then
it's the intention. Then one is to
the
say
motivation.
look how special I am, and the other one is to say, look at the tools I've created to be a benefit to you.
Well, whatever it is, but the motivation to want to know that this is not defining you. Being a musician, being famous and being rich are not defining characteristics of you. And that's the proof, is when you lose them and you're devastated, it's because you relied too heavily on them, and that's attachment's job. So we don't rely too heavily on those, then we use them anyway, and we grow ourselves as a better human being, and then we want to benefit others. So the motivation to want to grow yourself so you can benefit others is the ground of it all. Then you'll be stable, then you lose your money, you lose your reputation. It won't matter to you because you haven't done it merely for that sake. It's developing a motivation to be valid to yourself, develop your qualities, lessen your delusions, and benefit others. That's what makes it valid.